What happens when you want to launch thought leadership for your business unit, but you don't have the resources or budget available? Well, you face a choice. Either you wait until the stars align, or you find a way to make it happen. Today, I speak with Adam Zuckerman. He's at Willis Towers Watson, and he's passionate about employee engagement. As you'll hear, he's a psychologist, served as a practice leader, and now is the product lead for the Willis Towers Watson employee engagement software. Adam posts some of the most insightful thoughts about employee engagement on LinkedIn, so he's one of my regular must-reads in my morning. I've invited him to talk about how he bootstrapped thought leadership for his firm's employee engagement software, doing so as a team of one. We talk about his passion for his work and how that fuels his ability to create thought leadership. And we talk about the impacts he's seen through his thought leadership work. I'm Bill Sherman, and you're listening to Leveraging Thought Leadership. Ready? Let's begin. Welcome to the show, Adam.
Thanks, Bill. I'm happy to join you today.
So one of the things that I'm excited to talk to you about is how you have intentionally shaped the voice of your thought leadership. I know you have training as an academic and that you look at a topic, employee engagement, which can be very quantitative, but you often use a personal approach to storytelling. And if I can put you on the spot a little bit, I want to relate to something that you posted this morning as we're recording about your experiences when you were 11 at sleepaway camp. If you could maybe summarize that story, and then let's sort of dig into it from a thought leadership perspective.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for that. Well, that post was about a summer when I was 11 years old, and I volunteered for something called Survival, which, of course, subsequently became a television show having nothing to do with that. But this was years before. This was 1980, I think. And they had a program at sleepaway camp called Survival where you would leave the camp and they would take you off into the woods and leave you there for 24 hours. They give you some basic training about how to build a shelter and so forth. And you got very limited supplies. And they would basically drop you off. And if you made it 24 hours, they come back in 24 hours. And if you had made it, then you got this cool necklace and you had survived. And so I volunteered to do this in retrospect, unwisely, but it seemed kind of cool. And it was a total disaster. I didn't pay attention to any of the training they gave. And I wound up, it wound up raining. I mean, torrentially, biblically raining all night long. And I hadn't prepared at all. And it was a really incredible, indelible kind of enduring experience for me. And I remember with great clarity, they gave you a whistle, a plastic whistle that you blow in case of emergency. You know, the camp leaders weren't that far away, obviously. It seemed like it when you're a kid, and if there's a problem, they come and get you. And when the rain came, I blew that whistle like you wouldn't believe. And the guy came out and said, "What's the problem?" I said, "I want to go home, back to camp, right now." And he wouldn't take me. He said, "You can do this." And the post was about that experience and I did do it and I did make it. And in retrospect, how much I valued it and I valued him and what he did, right? Which was he kind of believed in me more than I believed in myself. I was panicking. I was essentially in tears. And he was saying, "No, it's all right. You can get through this." And he was right. And so that's what the post was about. It was about leaders who believe in employees sometimes more than they believe in themselves and how powerful that can be.
So what I loved about that at the end is I realized as I got older, I wanted to be that leader, right? And so you were speaking to the experience of your younger self and then connecting it to who you wanted to be today. Talk to me in terms of the conscious choices you're making in creating the voice for your thought leadership. Because as I said, it could be sort of very academic or very metrics oriented. You've led with story and you've led with narrative. That seems a choice.
Yeah, I mean it is, and I mean part of it is I'm a frustrated writer, and to some extent, uh, and I know that story resonates with people, but I mean, but that's also just how I experience it. It's how I experience work and in the world. And so, yeah, I have academic training and I have extensive training in statistics and methodology, and that's all valuable. But ultimately, I do think it's the experience we all have and the emotions that we all have around work that really are important and make the difference. And I mean, I wouldn't exactly say this, but it's a little corny, I suppose. But I mean, all the academic literature and all the research is adds tremendous value. But to me, a lot of the best decisions and the right kind of judgment is intuitive. It's sort of you know what to do in the moment. And so I guess that's partly what I'm relying on as well, right? It's just the research and all that and all the statistics are great and inform, the creation of best practices and all the rest. But ultimately, I think it comes down to your own experience and your perspective. And a lot of that is sort of, more fundamental than even the research and the quantitative data.
So, a friend of mine, he uses the example that often research provides data and validation for things which are intuitive, but you're not certain of. And I think making that invisible instinct visible, whether through story or data, is really some of the heavy lifting work of thought leadership.
Yeah, I agree. I think the data confirms it, as you say, the data validates it, but the data also makes it, sort of it provokes action. I mean, we do employee surveys for companies all over the world, and I've done this work for a very long time. And very, very, very rarely do I come in and run an employee survey and share the results with executives and share something they didn't already know.
Mhm.
I mean, and the thing, they pay a lot for the service and they put a lot of effort into it and it's valuable. But at the end of the day, most of what we come up with, they already know. It validates it, it quantifies it, it puts it in front of them in a way that provokes action. And that's where a lot of the value is, right? It's not necessarily saying here's something you really had no idea was going on in your organization and we've uncovered it. The fact is, a lot of these things already. We're putting some language around it and some terms around it that allows you to understand it maybe a bit better and focuses action. And that's really what all that data does, I think.
And then also helps you identify where do you apply effort, what's going to help, as well as then if you can track on a longitudinal basis, you can say, okay, my gut says it's getting better. Is it just me or am I believing anecdata because I talked to three people? Right.
Totally right. Totally right. I mean, it allows you to decide among all the things you could work on, what are some of the most pressing. So it does allow you to prioritize, which is so critical given how busy everybody is. And yeah, it allows you to size the problem, to track it over time. But fundamentally, I mean, I have a colleague from years ago used to say we're sort of in the work that I do, we are motivational speakers with data. And I think a lot of ways that is true, right? And the reason it's such a valuable process because it's data about the individual, specific to the individual, their company. So it's one thing to say, only 30% of employees are engaged. It's another to say only 30% of your employees are engaged. And we know that because we just asked them like last week. That has a lot more power. So, but the reality is in both cases, the leader already knows they've got an engagement problem. The leader already knows that most people are not engaged because they work with these people. Like it's not a mystery, but it makes it concrete and specific and it validates it. And as you say, it allows you to track it over time and identify what are some of the levers we could pull or push to address it.
Well, and if I remember the studies correctly, and you know probably better than I, isn't employee engagement a ceiling to customer experience as well? So your employees or your customers will never be more satisfied than your employees.
It's a great way to put it. Somebody said, I think it was Richard Branson said, the customer's not number one, the employee's number one, and they'll take care of the customer. And yeah, I mean they're intricately tied together. the employee experience and the customer experience. I can't think of any better way to improve the customer experience than through the employee experience. So yeah, that's been proven over and over again. We have tons of data on that question, as do many others. But yeah, that is a critical aspect of customer experience is the employee experience.
So, how did you get into the world of employee experience? And specifically, one of the things that I see in our conversations and in the work that you're producing in thought leadership is you have a passion for it. So, where does that come from? Talk to us a little bit about the journey. How did you get into thought leadership specifically around employee experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. So my background is in psychology, and in college, that was my major. And to me, it seemed just like I guess it does for everyone when you have a passion. I wondered why wasn't everybody doing this? Like it was so obvious and immediate and sort of real to me. Like, yeah, I want to think about people and why they do what they do. I mean, that was, and then the other field was always, I always wanted to relate it to that. So why not just go right to that? Like I can study history and think about how it relates to people, but I just want to study people. So that was, always kind of central to what I was interested in intuitively, naturally, and applying it to the world of work seemed a very natural thing. I went to NYU for my PhD in social psychology, which is the most interpersonal field of psychology in some ways. And just being in New York, being around all those businesses, this was the 90s. And at the time, business was cool and interesting and the economy was great. And so it made sense to apply what I was interested in, which is people and why they do what they do and how they experience the world, to the world of work. And so, I came out of graduate school and joined a boutique firm in Chicago that was doing exactly this kind of work. It was relatively new at that time. It was still early days for this kind of work, where the very notion of surveying employees and listening to what they say and actually doing something about it was not an obvious thing to do. And to raise your hand at a Fortune 500 company, say we should do this and spend money on it, was still wasn't a radical notion, but it took some guts. And I joined this company that was all about that, and the leader was very charismatic and believed in it, and believed in the fundamental idea of giving voice to employees. And I basically stayed in that job for the last 25 years. Now the company has grown, it was acquired, it merged with another company. So all kinds of things happened that gave me new experiences, new resources, new colleagues, new clients. But I've really been doing more or less the same kind of thing for 25 years. And I haven't gotten tired of it at all, because every organization is different. The issues are different. The employee experience is different and continues to evolve. And to me, it's endlessly fascinating.
Well, and one of the things I really enjoy in seeing your work is that passion comes through and shines brilliantly. So you're now at Willis Towers Watson, and you served as a practice lead for a number of years on the business development side. Let's connect thought leadership and business development. And I'd be curious on hearing your perspective on thought leadership from the BD world.
Well, it's interesting because, particularly in this field, so technology has really played an increasingly important role in this whole process, in understanding the employee experience, which often relies on surveying employees or otherwise sort of tracking their behavior and analyzing it. And so technology has become more and more important, and really in many ways taken over in terms of this activity. So to be an employee experience expert is often synonymous with really being an expert in the technology, which is why I, in the last few years, transitioned into this product leader role. But what's interesting to me about it is that ultimately it's really about people. I mean, it's not about technology. So I had another colleague who say you can't automate your way to engagement. And I think that's a really concise way to put it. I mean, yes, technology is critically important. If you're going to survey employees, you want to do it in a technologically sophisticated and advanced way. And if you're going to understand employee behaviors, you're going to have to understand what they're doing on Outlook or what they're doing. Their work lives are fundamentally about technology. But to really understand the employee experience and to really I believe, take action in a way that'll improve it requires an understanding of people fundamentally, not technology. And so I think actually technology has kind of been overemphasized in a lot of this work. And so in sales, to me, what resonates in the success that I've had, what tends to resonate with prospects and clients is, yes, they want to know that you've got bona fides around technology, but they want to understand how you think about the employee experience, and they want to know that you provide value outside of technology. To me, that is a differentiating factor for Will Stars Watson, and I think what's most interesting to me, and I think what's still really valuable to clients and what resonates in a sales context.
If you are enjoying this episode of Leveraging Thought Leadership, please make sure to subscribe. If you'd like to help spread the word about the podcast, please leave a 5-star review and share it with your friends. We are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and all major platforms, as well as at leveragingthoughtleadership.com. So one of the things, and you and I had a conversation on this, was you made a decision over the last couple of years in terms of focusing more effort around thought leadership for the product and being visible. Would you talk to us a little bit about how that idea came to be and then how it manifested?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm part of a very big company at Will Stars Watson, but it's a small group within that company. And so, like anyone, I'm sure you can imagine, there's always a challenge to get resources and attention. And so I experienced that. And so, a colleague said to me, I can't take credit for this, said, we could try to fight and get our marketing dollars, with all the other parts of Will Stars Watson, and we should do that. But also, there's no reason we can't do our own marketing and tell our own story using social media, which has, of course, changed everything. And she introduced me to LinkedIn, which I really, I was on, but I hadn't really used much. I thought it was a job, primarily just a job posting, site, really.
And since you hadn't basically changed jobs in 25 years,
Exactly.
You're like, hey, that's not to me, right?
I had no need for it whatsoever. And she said, no, it's where people are consuming content about the workplace. And so I checked it out and I was like, yeah, you're right. And so I started posting my ideas, and I was really surprised and really thrilled at how interesting it was, the people I was able to meet, the connections I made, and the stuff I was consuming, as well as putting out there. I mean, it's been a really positive experience, and an organic one. Like we have put nothing behind it. We have no funding or anything. I mean, I do it on my own. I write stuff on the weekends. I do it because I started doing it because I thought it would help the business, and it was a way to kind of get free marketing. But then I found out that I really enjoy it. It's fun, and I like sharing these ideas. And I learn things when the act of writing stuff helps you, in my mind, helps you focus and clarify your ideas. And then you get feedback, and people share all kinds of things. So I mean, it's I kind of miss the social media thing in a way because I'm a little bit older. When I grew up, we didn't have all this stuff. And so I didn't really get it, but I get it. I get it now. I get it with LinkedIn, that's for sure. And I've also found, this is not an advertisement for LinkedIn, but I found that the discourse is really civil on LinkedIn. I mean, you don't see, at least I don't run into, political disagreements and people being nasty and all that stuff. I mean, people are really open and share stuff and do it in a way that I think really healthy and productive. I mean, I've really been really impressed with how positive the environment is.
Well, and one of the things in terms of that discourse is by putting ideas out there, not only the act of putting out the idea helps you polish it, but also you get this amazing feedback from people who engage, who help you either sharpen the idea or they share a story. And you can see the conversation's ripples spread, which I think is absolutely fantastic.
Totally. And I've got so many times when I've I've also gotten ideas for posts from reading things because they spark something in my mind, and that leads to something. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. But also, I found that there's some general sort of, I mean, it's improved my writing generally, candidly, and my sort of presentation skills, because it's interesting. I mean, social media gets such a bad rap, and there's obviously some downsides to it for sure. But I mean, one of the things is it's a really pure marketplace of ideas, right? I mean, it's incredibly pure marketplace of ideas. If you put something out there, if it's valuable, people are going to like it. And if it's not, they won't. And it's on you to make it valuable and to present it in a compelling way and to think about how it's being presented and make sure that it's not too long and, doesn't meander and doesn't use jargon people. And I mean, it's really, those are good rules of thumb in general, just in terms of how to communicate in a sales context, in any context. So, I mean, it's been great training in a way, right? How do you craft a message that'll have value and that'll make a point, make it clearly, get the right amount of attention? I mean, those are really useful skills in life
You talk
to
about
have.
you talk about being scrappy, and one of the things that comes to mind in terms of that writing is when you're posting regularly, you learn which opening lines catch people's attention and
Right.
which ones they just scroll past.
Right.
And you may go, "Oh, I had a brilliant post and it was such a great idea," but nobody clicked the see more button, right?
Totally. The analysis of it is really fascinating too, to see what worked and what didn't and how you can tweak it. And again, I mean, some of that is, sort of superficial and transactional in a way, but some of it is really deep, right? Like, what do people care about? What's going to stop somebody? You know what I mean? So like, there's some phrasings and sort of techniques, if you will, that interest me to some extent, but more what interests me is like, what truly resonates, what is important to people, right? What is worth their time to read and why? I mean, there's so much to learn from social media that way, and LinkedIn in particular, that's just been tremendous.
So let me ask you a question in terms of this sort of approach of thought leadership. Have you seen, or is it still early days, impact and results in terms of the product and business and opportunities?
We have absolutely already had opportunities that we would not have otherwise had, real like leads. Not a tremendous number. I mean, it's not like an avalanche, but we have had leads that we would otherwise not have had. A healthy percentage of those have converted. And we've also had opportunities that we would normally have, but had people recognize us. Now, I've had people say, "Oh yeah, I've seen your stuff on LinkedIn," and it's actually really powerful. I mean, it's a valuable addition to your sort of raw presentation and credibility. So it's been great.
One of the things that I think is cool is when you have a prospect who's been following you, they come to you at the time when they have budget, they're in a buying cycle, and they start quoting what you've posted.
Right.
Is absolutely fantastic.
Right. Totally. Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's what's really interesting to me, if I really studied, is like, if my colleague hadn't suggested this to me, it would have completely passed me by. And I wonder how I can share the word, share these ideas with more people, and because it just feels like an opportunity that's not as utilized as it could be. And in fact, that's one of the other things that's happened is I've had a lot of colleagues reach out to me saying, "Hey, I've seen your stuff. How do you do that? Who helped you do that? When did you start doing that?" And I've helped them along, and I'm very happy to do it. And that's been really rewarding to see. And I've also had some marketing people now come back to me in my own company and said, maybe we can tweak. And I said, "Listen, I started this on my own. It's been totally organic. I'd really like to just leave the voice as it is. I'm happy for you to reshare it, but I don't want to make it too corporate. I think that's part of the value." And then it's been as we've done.
So it would be an entirely different story. We opened with the story of you as 11 at sleepaway camp.
That's not coming out of Willis Towers Watson corporate.
Yeah, you can't corporate brand that story, right? In the same way.
Exactly.
And I think one of the things that thought leadership offers the opportunity if you have the courage individually to share part of yourself and step out alongside the brand and be seen as a voice of the brand, but not the brand, is you can share pieces of yourself in a professional way and setting that people would never have seen, but they get to know you in an entirely different way.
Totally. And that's an endlessly fascinating discussion I've seen on LinkedIn, which is people saying it's become Facebook or something, or it's people are share too much personal stuff. Should you share personal? And to me, there's a clear, I think there's great value in sharing personal stuff, but to me, there's a very clear way to do it and way not to. And it's hard for me to articulate, but when I scroll, I see it. I see this seems really just personal and sort of not maybe that relevant. But I see other stories that are. And I think, if there are lessons and you can connect them to the workplace, it's great. It's more powerful. I do sometimes see people just seemingly sharing about something personal. Maybe it's not as appropriate, but that's a very interesting line that is evolving. And it's important to I think, navigate that properly.
So, one of the things that I want to, as we start wrapping up here, sort of emphasize is you took on the de facto role of head of thought leadership for the product and said, okay, this needs to be done. No one else is doing it. I don't necessarily have budget, but we're going to make it happen. I want to ask you this question. I'm certain not only in Willis Towers Watson, but also in other organizations, people who are product owners or who are responsible as a practice lead, they're in a similar situation. What advice would you give them as they start on that journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I guess I would encourage them as strongly as I could to try, just to try it. Not to. There's a million reasons, not to do it, but I feel like once you get going, there's a momentum and an excitement and an interest that takes over, and starting with a lot of things is sort of the hardest part. It's the old idea of, if you wait till you're ready, you never do it. You got to do it before you feel ready. And so I think starting really is the hardest part. And I would encourage people to explore it and post. And not all of them will experience the way I have, but a lot of them will. And I think that might be the biggest hurdle. It's just getting started.
I think for the people that I've spoken to, when they've taken on that role of de facto head of thought leadership for their product or their offering, there's a bit of surprise and delight when it starts getting momentum and they go,
Yes.
oh, this is a new way to talk about this. And it feels authentic. It is me.
Yes. It really is exhilarating. You're totally right. I mean, sounds silly. And I'm sure for younger people, they'll be like, well, of course, that's the way their lives are. But there's a generation of people like me who are still very much active in the workplace who didn't grow up with that. And I mean, I'm embarrassed to say I once had a client actually send me an invite for Facebook, or a friend, however it works. I'm not on Facebook, but I replied and I said, like, this is early days. I said, isn't Facebook for teenagers or people stalking teenagers? And I because I just didn't get it. And, like I said, I'm still not into Facebook, but I missed that whole thing. And I would urge people who are of my generation to rediscover it, because it can really be special and really powerful. And it's easy to dismiss when you're older, but it is a new way of talking to people. You're right.
So, one last question. If you hadn't started this journey, what would you have missed? And what would be the impact?
Well, the thing is, you know what? It's interesting you said. I think I've reflected on this, that I would have wasted time in other ways. In other words, what LinkedIn is really great for is it fills we all have time in our days where we're not totally focused on the job just naturally. And so, you might check the ball scores or you might check the news or whatever. And I would have done a lot more of that, which is wasted time. And instead, I filled it reading interesting things about what's happening in my field and contributing to that. It hasn't really taken any more time, truly. I mean, it takes some time on the weekends, but that would have been wasted too, So what it's done is it's filled what is already empty space with something of value, in my opinion. And that's, something that I think I would really regret if I hadn't discovered this.
Adam, I really have enjoyed this conversation, and I want to thank you for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Bill. I've enjoyed it as well.
If you're interested in organizational thought leadership, then I invite you to subscribe to the OrgTL newsletter. Each month, we talk about the people who create, curate, and deploy thought leadership on behalf of their organizations. Go to the website orgtl.com and choose Join Our Newsletter. I'll leave a link to the website as well as my LinkedIn profile in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing what you thought of the show.